Thank you for joining, everybody. We're going to wait just 1 minute so people can log in. Okay, it's 1:01. We're going to start. Thank you for joining, everybody. We really appreciate you joining us on a Friday, and we mostly appreciate our speakers today. Alan Wapner has been a true friend of the BIA and trying to get through this housing crisis. And Cheryl, we appreciate you being on today. I think today's going to be a very in-depth nuts and bolts meeting, and everybody's learning about RHNA now. Might now know that if I yell out RHNA, they know that the kitchen's a mess and they need to clean up after themselves. But all seriousness aside, BIA, we want to do more. We need to deal with this housing crisis together. RHNA is a part of that equation. No matter what the statistics show, whatever number they put on the table, we have to work together and figure out a solution, regardless of the policies that come out of Sacramento. We need to build, and we need to build with local government. So we really appreciate everyone's time today. And BIA is trying to do more in a proactive and a collaborative manner. And that comes to our president, Dave Bartlett of Brookfield, who will be leading the discussion and moderating today. So with that, Mr. Bartlett, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jeff. Well, why don't we just get right to it? First of all, I would like to thank the Baldyview chapter of the Building Industry Association, Carlos Rodriguez, the executive officer and 17-year veteran of the BIA, I might add, and Tim Roberts, president of the chapter, for coordinating the program. Second, I would like to welcome our esteemed panel that will dive into the subject matter of Regional Housing Needs Assessment. Everybody knows the acronym now, RHNA. Our panelists, Alan Wapner, Mayor Pro Tem of the City of Ontario. Alan has had a very long and successful tenure on the City Council, is past president of the Southern California Association of Governments. And Ontario, of course, is the epicenter for commerce and industry in the IE, and is also known for its master plan community of Ontario Ranch. We also have Cheryl Kitzerow, the Community Development Director for the City of Menifee. The Menifee residential base has expanded significantly over the past decade and is home to several quality master plan communities. So she brings that perspective to the table. And finally, we have Jennifer Hernandez, an attorney with Holland and Knight, who also sits on our BIASC governing board. And she might just be considered a little bit of a RHNA savant. And so we will see if you agree with us at the end of the show. So let's do a brief description. I'll set the table here quickly, and then we'll move right into it. So there is no question that we are behind on our production, and there's a housing crisis in California. We need to produce 180,000 permits per year just to keep up with demand. And last year, we only produced about 100,000 permits statewide. And the last time supply and demand were at equilibrium was that 2002-2005 timeframe. So as a result, we're at an all-time imbalance. Then secondly, we have a governor that signed 18 housing bills in 2019, and he said, I'm going to quote him here, we want to build 3.5 million new homes in the state of California by 2025. How about that statement? Did he mean it? And we're going to find out from our panelists. The state of California, through SCAG, has allocated 1.4 million housing units for our region, the SCAG'S region of 191 cities, to be planned and potentially produced between 2021 and 28. So we're going to get into that. And then at the local level, we have cities like Ontario and Menifee that are preparing housing elements to be submitted to HCD that will demonstrate the locations and the capacity for their fair share of the 1.4 million units. And for Menifee, it's about 6,600 units. And for Ontario, it's a little over 20,000. Alan have the exact number. But when we look at the sub-regions of Ontario and Menifee and the cities that are adjacent, those numbers rise to 30,000 for the Menifee sub-region and 45,000 for the Ontario sub-region. So we're talking of quite a bit of larger numbers when you look at the subregion. So this is the RHNA deck of cards that we are playing with. And so we're going to go to a lightning round quickly, lightning round before we come back to comments from each of you. So individually, or 1 minute each, can your city and your subregion meet this challenge? Yes or no, and a quick reason why. And for Jennifer, not associated with the city, what's one quick tool that SCAG, that these cities may be able to implement to take a bold step forward in meeting their obligation? So you have a minute. Probably I can stretch that to a minute and a half, but Alan, would you mind kicking us off?
Well, sure. I mean, this is a great topic. The question was, can we meet the numbers? You know, under RHNA, it's easy to meet the numbers. I have to do a zone for, you don't have to build a single house. So the question is, sure, we can include our zoning to do all that. And as you know, doing development in Ontario, we certainly have our share of zoning there with a potential 50,000 new units. It's the timing that counts, but we'll get more into that when we go back around.
Cheryl Kitzerow.
Thank you. Happy to be here this afternoon. Yes, I would agree with Alan. Certainly the city of Menifee can accommodate the number of units assigned to us in the RHNA, but again, like we all know, the RHNA requires us to accommodate it. It doesn't require us to produce.
Jennifer, lightning round.
Yep. So I think that's exactly right. Both of the esteemed speakers are exactly right that RHNA requires a zoning exercise. If you don't follow through and actually approve projects, then right now there are some consequences, like being able to be forced to approve a project under SB 35 and some other consequences that play out later. But in terms of actually trying to meet RHNA goals, in addition to doing some zoning stuff that I'll talk about in a minute, one of the key things you can do is try to get out of the sort of CEQA trap through your own structure. So two things there. One is if you can set up a conditional use permit approval process that makes clear what your objective criteria are, height, setback, density, whatever, then that will actually streamline significantly and allow you to tier significantly off of earlier CEQA documents, which is great. But then not give up your ability to actually do important design and other protections for your community in the form of design review boards, but you must limit the design review board's authority to addressing just that, design, and not also mitigating environmental impacts. If you allow your design review board to have enough authority to mitigate impacts, then their decision is CEQA triggering too, which is ready. Everybody should be ready to shoot themselves in the head. So write the rules so your design review boards protect design, and your use permitting process for residential is based on objective criteria, and you will have a smoother time controlling your housing future.
Now, did I say earlier that Jennifer might be considered a RHNA savant? So let's just all vote in favor of that right now. So thank you, Jennifer. Alan, want to throw it back to you. Opportunities and constraints from your viewpoint as an Ontario leader and policymaker on where you guys will take it from here.
Well, certainly I think Ontario might be the exception to the rule in that you can give me as many numbers as you want. We can't build enough housing, and we're doing that. We're building new construction as well as infill kinds of projects. From a regional standpoint, it's not that simple. Obviously, during the last RHNA process, I think we ran almost 60 appeals from our cities in our region. That in itself says it's something broken about the system, that many cities are having problems with it. You know, I think the state shares the same noble goal as we all do in building more houses. It just, everyone admits that there's a huge housing crisis. How we get there, I think it's when the state should just stop. Everyone says, what can the state do for you? And obviously our answer is always stay out of our business. Don't keep applying obstacles to us, such as CEQA. Everyone's talked about CEQA reform. When I talk to legislators, we always talk about it, that CEQA in itself has been bastardized, is not being used for environmental purposes. If they just eliminated the hurdles instead of placing the demands on us, that would certainly help. As far as meeting the housing numbers that they give us. Again, Ontario, we didn't object. You know, we don't have any problem. We would love to build over 20,000 units. Problem, obviously, 14,000 are required to be affordable. And once again, the state applies the requirement of affordable, but they've given, in fact, they've taken away any tools that we have to build affordable housing. The BIA ought to be setting all these rules because they know what reality is. They know that we can't build affordable without some subsidy. The subsidy always came from redevelopment set aside. They took that tool away, but yet they still want us to build affordable housing. In fact, I'll share a conversation right after Jerry Brown took redevelopment away. I was talking to one of our local legislators, I won't say her name, and I said, well, what are we going to do about affordable housing now? And she said, well, what do you mean? We just took away RDA. I said, exactly. Where do you think the money came from? This is a legislator that voted to take redevelopment away. They haven't given us a good substitute for it yet. As we've already mentioned, zoning for RHNA doesn't mean we're going to build a single house. Really, and maybe I'm different than other policymakers. I still believe in market demand. I still believe that builders are going to build wherever the market demands that they build. I also believe that each city has an obligation to maintain a jobs housing balance. And in fact, in reality, you need to do that before an employer will come to your city. They want to make sure there's sufficient housing for their employees. So you really have an obligation to do that. And I've told my friends in Orange County, I'm sure there's people watching from Orange County, that you do have an obligation, that if you don't want to build more housing, stop building jobs. I mean, as long as you're building more jobs, you really have a requirement to build housing, and stop complaining about folks coming into your county from Riverside and San Bernardino. What do you expect them to do? Ontario, we're very conscious of maintaining that jobs housing. Even though we're building, like I said, about 50,000 new houses, we're still going to be 15,000 units short of the jobs that we're going to create. So we know that, and we are building more houses. We are zoning for more houses. We see that brick and mortar retail is going away. Say, hey, we threw down a Kmart. I'm building housing there. Any opportunity I have to do that, I'm going to do it. So once again, I think that market demand is what's going to determine where the housing goes. I think losing some of the requirements and obstacles that we give that the builders or have instilled in them, I think that'll help. And then obviously solving the affordability problem is another one that we need help doing. That we just need, again, we need the state to stay out of our way. The localities need to be able to work with private developers and the BIA to really find how we're best able to build the houses that are so necessary.
Thank you, Alan. I love that you said the BIA ought to be writing these regulations. Can we get on that right away, Jeff? Really great comments, Alan. And we're going to come back because you brought up several good points, and I want to come back to that. But let's go to our speakers next. Cheryl Kitzerow, really, we're just kind of teeing it up is opportunities, issues, constraints in Menifee as it relates to your 6,600 unit obligation, and particularly maybe try to hit on a couple of the points maybe that Alan made related to the state and staying out of our way, and then also maybe the affordable housing aspect.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. I would echo the sentiments of Alan for sure. I think, for Menifee, we're a young city. We're the fourth fastest growing city in the state of California with a population over 30,000. We're building housing. Where we have some challenges is, infrastructure deficiencies. Being such a young city, we have a lot of infrastructure needs that need to come along and keep pace with that housing development. And then also that jobs housing balance. We need those houses. We're, effortlessly looking to attract jobs and industry here to our community, but all of that comes in time. We incorporated in 2008. And so, we're still a young city. We don't have a lot of the opportunities for things that Alan referenced, like the Kmart turning that into residential. We are still working to build commercial development. And so we also need to make sure that we balance residential and commercial developments. Certainly the 6609 units that the city of Menifee has to accommodate in the next cycle. Again, we could zone for that, but without partnerships from the development community, it's not going to get built. And I would agree 100% in terms of the affordability component. The city of Menifee Incorporated, we did not have a redevelopment agency, so we don't have a successor agency. We don't have any of those carryover funds to subsidize affordable housing. And also, we don't have a lot of vacant city-owned property to offer as a negotiating tool as well when you talk about a partnership for subsidized housing. So really, you know, it's about, for us, streamlining the process and doing other creative things when development proposals come before us to help get those homes produced.
Thank you, Cheryl. Great perspective of some of the differences between Ontario and Menifee. Being Ontario has been a city since probably the late 1800s, right, Alan? And Menifee, 2008. Really good perspective. Now we're going to go over to Jennifer Hernandez. Jennifer, I think you have a couple of tools in your toolbox that you're going to talk about.
Yes, and you should all be extremely grateful that Adam Wood, who is not 61, is going to be running the slides so that possibly they will be run efficiently. But at this point, we, I think, would like to share the screen and come on, Adam. Okay, and let's just go through this. So look, these are some real nuts and bolts, nerdy ideas. Not every one of them is going to make sense. Some of them probably are going to be really stupid, but these are nerdy ideas that get you, I think, into a framework of how can you tackle this quickly, because you don't have a lot of time, and frankly, creatively, so that it can work as much as possible in your community. So first off, you know, the political resistance to new housing is traditionally associated with single family home neighborhoods, established neighborhoods. And it's long been a tenet of urban planning that you don't screw up a neighborhood that's working. You know, that's one of those things. So we've got a couple of, you know, low hanging fruit kind of siting opportunities for you to go off and think about zoning to residential. One of the things you need to know, though, is the RHNA law doesn't allow you to zone for residential or industrial or commercial. In order to be counted, you really have to do residential or mixed use with a minimum component of residential. So you're talking about putting residential zoning. And these are not going to follow your perfect pattern of proximity to, you know, public parks or elementary schools or whatever. They're going to be some outlying or under parcels that were absolutely not conceived with the idea of residential. But business parks, vacant land, and frankly, idled land. Before the pandemic, there were a whole bunch of golf courses that were going under. I think they're all booming now, but some churches, a lot of churches have gone under, shopping and retail centers. The bigger the center, especially the multi-tenant centers, the more complicated the parking restrictions are. And it's pretty hard to untangle that, but you can zone, you can upzone, but the standalone big box, the strip malls, even the 2 or 3 tenant centers are relatively easy. And then frankly, if you know there's stuff for sale or tax foreclosure, give it some zoning. Now there's some tricks though to the trade. Next slide. So it's very, very tempting because everyone talks about high density, transit oriented, whatever, to upzone to heights that your city has not seen before. The Bay Area has done this for the closer, probably now almost 15 years. The Bay Area has literally pretended that it's going to soon be feasible to build 12-story apartment buildings in Hayward or wherever, and it's just nonsense. You need rents of, you know, $4,000 or $5,000 a unit to actually make those projects pencil. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because we now have other housing laws that say if you downzone by not approving the MAC zoning that your code allows for, at the time you approve your project with less than the max, you have to identify another site where you're going to put the slop over. So if you aspirationally zone for a 12-story unit, but it's really only 4 stories that you can, reasonably support with your income levels, then you've got, at the time you approve that project, this huge hurdle of trying to put 400 stranded parcel or units somewhere else. And by the way, putting them somewhere else triggers CEQA for that somewhere else. So please don't fall into the trap of doing too aggressive a level of zoning with heights and densities. Anything steel and almost anything, podium is going to not be affordable to median and even 120% above median income families. And that missing middle is the all important solution. If we can get the missing middle into new products, then where they're living now should be available at a much lower price point as existing housing for lower income families. We never, ever, ever in California had more than 5% of our housing stock be, quote, affordable housing. Deed restricted, taxpayer funded affordable housing at the height of redevelopment was 5% of the housing stock. And everyone, including Legislative Analyst's Office and others, have confirmed that we have to have a housing market that works. And that housing market means we have to have move-up homes, including move-up apartments or condos, and move-up starter homes in order to free up lower cost existing housing. So please don't get seduced by the idea of, creating a strip of Manhattan down a bus route. It's just not going to pencil. Go ahead. So there's a really big disconnect, as the other speakers have already mentioned, between zoning for affordable housing and actually getting affordable housing. RHNA doesn't require that you identify funding sources for affordable housing. And it still has, for Southern California, this magic safe harbor of 20 DUs per acre, or sorry, 30 dwelling units per acre, except out in Inyo, I think. But 30 DUs per acre is considered affordable by design. That's like a garden apartment, 2-3 story, basically. You can do it as townhomes. 30 DUs per acre, though, is a pretty flexible and can be a very cost-efficient form of housing. So if you can do 30 DUs per acre, you can count those as affordable zoned locations. How you actually get to the number of affordable units is nothing that anyone has figured out. Obviously, if you can only require 10 to 15% inclusionary at most in order for projects to pencil, and most of California, not even that much pencils, more like 5-7, if at all, then, communities have talked about, well, hey, we have to way up zone for market rate in order to create, the 7% affordable or whatever. Don't go there. It'll drive you crazy. Just live with this, my judgment, live with this 30 DU an acre safe harbor to meet your affordable housing requirements at this RHNA cycle level at this now.
Hey, Jennifer, let's also bring in the audience here at this point, which Eric Fowler had a question right on this subject, and I'll go ahead and ask it because I think it's relevant here. His question was, it appears RHNA is defining affordable housing as higher density at 30 DUs per acre, like you just explained. His secondary, or his question was, what is the genius of that number? And so maybe a little background from the builder side, we would say that when you're at that density, either your rents or your for sale price is going to be fairly attainable. But I'd like to hear your perspective.
Mine, Dave?
Was there a genius in coming up with that number from a policy standpoint, and actually for any of the panelists?
It was Sacramento.
So it didn't make any sense.
I think there was some accidental sense that just reflected reality of it being a more affordable building typology. It was done before we were even doing steel framed high rises almost anywhere in California. So it was considered high density at a time of low density. The last point I'll make is just don't underestimate how much missing middle you can attain in zoning. You know, you can, if you want to go from ADU to, you know, to 2 DUs for some neighborhoods that have single family homes, or even 3 DUs. R3 is not considered like a death knell in some locations. And even R4, stacked flats, duplexes, you know, these are all completely classic, can be completely beautiful product types. And again, if you put an R2 or an R3 on top of, you know, some R1 lots, you can count those. And those are, believe it or not, more likely to be, you know, missing middle product types. Okay. Next.
Next slide.
So parking is a big bugaboo, and the geniuses in the Bay Area and to some extent Sacramento, West LA, have said that if you just prohibit parking, the cars will go away. And as we know, that is not the way the market works. You can't get a bank loan unless you have enough parking for people who can pay back their bank loan or credit-worthy tenants. But there are a couple of things that you can do, and it's going to drive you crazy, but it's been done, and you should consider just getting on this bandwagon, or you know, life is going to be more difficult. Tandem parking is a ton cheaper. Nobody likes it, and of course, the whole game with building enclosed parking is you end up with a storage room, not a parking place. And so we have had cities, you know, successfully use, and certainly there's a number of, especially infill developers that are pretty fierce about enforcing no storage requirements in garages. And you actually cannot, as a city right now, prohibit tandem parking. And so with that state law already in place, updating your code to allow tandem parking so you don't have to go through this every single time, and putting in place requirements that the, you know, either inspection requirements if you want to make it public, or just private HOA type requirements, make sure that you know, garages stay for cars and not for storage. But parking is a big hot button issue. It's true everywhere across the country. It's true in California. But if you simply say, we're not going to allow parking here because it's, you know, 30 feet from a bus stop, you will probably have a project that never finances, and you've just killed yourself. In, you know, maybe we'll get to that point where we'll have jetpacks like the Jetsons and stuff, or we'll all be working from home. But right now, do what you can to make parking less expensive, but don't fall into the trap of not requiring any at all, or not allowing you to require any at all, or you won't get anything done. Next. ADUs. ADUs are one of the few production categories that has increased. Housing production has decreased steadily. Of course, even last year, the housing that is popular and is increasing, especially last year, were single family homes. And that's exactly what the state is wanting us not to build under these policies. But you can come up with a pretty credible ADU number, and you can do it in a few different ways, including from homeowner polls that are like, you know, you ask 100 people, you use a couple kids to ask 100 people whether they'd consider it, and, you know, 18 say yes, and then you say, okay, so we're going to assume 15% of our lots over the course of this next 8 years are going to have a second ADU. That's a big number, and that's another trick of the trade, as it were. These do count. ADUs count under RHNA, although the state is very aware of not wanting to game. And so, you know, every single family home is just automatically going to be an ADU. You've met RHNA, yay, that's not going to work. Okay, next. And then there's this whole kind of CEQA. CEQA at the housing element stage is a real pain in the patootie. And there's a new bill Cabrillo is introducing that will mean that housing elements can be adopted without CEQA, even zoning can be adopted without CEQA, but blaring out of that bill is, this means that projects don't have CEQA. Okay, now you've got a project. And now where's your cumulative analysis of water supply, of traffic, and traffic is still in CEQA as well as in general plans in a traditional LOS sense, although it's now stuck in sort of a couple different categories. But without CEQA coverage at the plan level, every single housing project is going to have to, especially the first few, invent the equivalent of that housing element EIR on citywide issues. And now you're asking, you know, a project to, instead of tearing off of a general plan EIR, housing element EIR, zoning neg deck, whatever it is, and go through CEQA quickly with an addendum, or even not even that. Now you're asking a project to figure out your park program for all of your RHNA numbers. And it's like, really? So please, please adopt your housing elements with addendums. Addendums under CEQA tiered off of the SCAG program EIR. Just do the best you can. Just do it. And then the housing project that moves forward can use that tiered EIR. You can also tier off of an earlier general plan for the city, or even an old redevelopment plan, but you don't have time to do EIRs. And if you do EIRs, you're going to get sued. And people want to do neg decks, but you'll get sued. So please use addendums under an earlier CEQA document when you approve your housing element. And you will create order from chaos and actually allow the kind of housing you want built to be built. That's as much as I want to sort of cover. I think, Dave, any more, Adam, or was that it? Oh, yeah, so there is this really problematic element of housing, which is it doesn't exist in isolation, right? You still have to move people and bikes and cars. You still have to deal with public service and recreation. You know, you kind of do need water and sewage and whatnot. So there are these other things that have to kind of fit. And there's a couple different ways to do it. You can try to do it for real on this schedule. Good luck. Or you can say you're going to add this much density and you're not going to make changes to the physical planning of the city that would allow for better circulation or whatever. We have an unfortunate reality, which is most communities don't have, say, enough water to accommodate 4,000 more units. And that's true. And so you can require cities to, you know, your city can say, we have, your EIR can say, and we have to have, you know, evidence of an adequate water supply at the project level. And that's a mitigation measure for the RHNA addendum, right? And it actually shouldn't be a mitigation measure at the addendum stage. It should be in your RHNA housing element. But touching on each of these other elements of circulation and public services with these shortcut references to still give you the authority you need and want and must have to make sure there's enough water and get through the process quickly is kind of where we're stuck right now, given the schedule the state has set up and the very, very unrealistic. I know I'm stepping into the middle of it in terms of, you know, fights between coastal and non-coastal counties and stuff. But the very idea that the RHNA allocations were made without regard to stuff like water supply and sewage capacity is pretty shocking. So we are going to have broken pieces here. But I think if cities can think about these tools, other tools of the trade to get through it quickly, you're not going to make your planning staff happy, but you'll get through it and still preserve your local control at the back end. And that is, I think, it, right, Adam? Oh, yeah, that's it.
Do you have another one, Jennifer?
I mean, I guess there's some last one. So a couple of things. One, there's an open now hostility to the idea of home ownership Scott Wiener said the ship had sailed on home ownership, as though we're not supposed to have that aspiration anymore. Defend against that, as you know, homeowners are in fact important as an upwardly mobile mechanism that has created more middle-class worth than the world has ever seen. But we're now having to say that expressly, because otherwise the doctrine is rental only, small, high-density units near bus stops. Also, the state, even the legislature, has acknowledged that California climate goals, while important, are actually undermined when Californians have to go to high greenhouse gas states like Texas and Nevada to find housing they can afford. A family that moves from California to Texas triples its greenhouse gas emissions. And so solving the housing crisis is actually attaining California's climate goals. And those climate goals are undermined for a global pollutant by forcing people to go to higher states that were higher GHG states. Lot split policies are another one of those, you know, low-hanging fruit opportunities. It's the next step, if you will, of ADUs, is to allow some lot splits, flag lots, and two, you know, two structure, one lot kind of solution in land that makes sense. It doesn't make sense in a lot of areas. And then it's another kind of controversial one, but to the extent, you know, you still have edge land that is unincorporated county, grab it as part of your sphere. The overwhelming opposition of the California Attorney General's office to development on unincorporated county land, as evidenced by a brief they just filed 2 days ago. To oppose a net zero greenhouse gas project, residential project in San Diego County. I fear for the future of counties and would encourage you to expand your spheres. Okay, sorry I went on.
That's okay. Jennifer, you mentioned the constraints that seemed to be missing from the analysis as it related to infrastructure, water availability, et cetera, and how units were assigned. Maybe I'll throw this one over to Alan, who is the sort of a policy expert here. Question from Mike Wolf was, how were the RHNA numbers developed from one community to another? Alan, you sit on SCAG'S, so what's your perspective on that?
Well, pretty much the state tells each region how many units are responsible for, then it's up to the Metropolitan Planning Organization, SCAG in this instance, to come up with a formula of how those numbers that were assigned to the region are going to be allocated to each city or jurisdiction. So that's how it's assigned to each city.
And then you mentioned there was an appeal process that cities could go through, but that didn't appear to be very successful.
I think there were maybe 1 or 2 instances where there was some reallocation, but it was, let's say, dozens of houses. It wasn't thousands of houses that were moved around.
Right. So we're faced with you know, some challenges here. ADUs were mentioned, and maybe throw it over to Cheryl. Since 2019, when the laws went into effect, have you seen an increase in the number of applications for accessory dwelling units? Is that really going to be part of the solution package here?
In Menifee, we haven't. I think the state came up with this legislation and said, open the doors and allow ADUs everywhere and make it very simple, and they will come. We have not realized that in Menifee. I think it is a good component of your housing element to, you know, facilitate and accommodate more units. In fact, we're using some of our SB2 grant funds to prepare permit-ready ADU template plans to help further facilitate the construction of ADUs on existing single-family lots. But we have not seen a significant increase in ADUs since the new laws went into effect.
Alan, how about in Ontario?
I think we're seeing more than what we expected to see. And of course, the problem with ADUs, had it been applied during the planning process, it's one thing, because as we talked about, the infrastructure just can't manage it. But when you have a city like Ontario that's been around for over 100 years, and then you start plugging in ADUs that we're not prepared for structurally, that becomes a problem. But yes, we have seen an increase in applications. I think that it's become almost like a cottage industry. There's builders going around knocking on doors saying, did you know you can make some rental money by building one of these in your backyard? And you're finding them in areas that you would never expect to find them. I thought the neighborhoods become more, would become angrier that these things are occurring, but it's become a practice now. By right, it makes it very difficult for a city.
Yeah, I agree. We have another question from the audience here. Maybe throw this one out to Jennifer from Elizabeth Hansberg. If the project needs parking to pencil, does that make AB 1401 shooting ourselves in the foot?
Yes. Look, again, you know, so this is by an author who is from a pretty dense, relatively, you know, well-off portion of LA. You know, the ADUs don't require, for example, another parking place. And so why not just try to get rid of parking? And the answer is, you can't get financing for some product types, certainly multifamily or ownership product at scale. But more importantly, you know, I think we are in the middle of a transportation revolution, no question, and in the middle of sort of a work revolution, no question. What we're finding, and I think everyone is predicting, is that we're going to not go back to that same 5-day-a-week peak hour commute pattern, which will be great for lots of reasons. But it's a pretty far cry from not having to drive to work during 5-day-a-week commute patterns and not owning a car at all. And if you own a car, you got to have a place to park it. Maybe we'll get to a point where, you know, there's kind of fleets of electric automated cars that run around ferrying you places and you don't have to have a car of your own or a place to put it. I don't think I'm going to make it to that future, but certainly we can't plan for that future today. And it's shocking to me, actually. This is going to be politically totally unacceptable, so I'm just going to say it. How many of these ideas come out of individual professionals who don't have kids? And it's like, if you've ever had to ferry 2 kids in 2 different directions, or God forbid, you know, take them to the doctors in the middle of the day, or deal with parents, or what, I mean, I don't know what kind of families these people are from, but the families that I know and am part of, a car is really important. And in fact, one of, I think, the underappreciated issues here, and we can clean up cars. We got rid of 98% of smog forming tailpipe emissions, according to Obama, just using the Clean Air Act. We made cars cleaner. We're going to make them electric. We can do that, but we can't actually decrease vehicle miles traveled while we have an economy and a population that, you know, is on the upswing. And so, to me, the kind of most amazing thing about the this whole VMT debate is how many people behind these policies just don't have to deal with the family realities that I grew up with and that, you know, most people in California have to live with. And when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich arranged kind of the retooling of welfare in America quite some years ago now, there were all kinds of predictions about what terrible things would happen. And all kinds of academic studies were underway about what happened to people who had been multi-generational welfare recipients and what made some succeed and what others didn't. And the truly astounding fact to come out of that scholarship was it wasn't moving people into some, you know, high net worth suburb or whatever. Really what predicted a family's ability to stay in the workplace and keep their kids in school, the single most important common feature was ownership of a working car. And when you think about it, it's like, well, yeah, I could see that. And so now what are we doing? We're making ownership and use of a car an environmental sin in California. It's really, it's really blind, frankly, to the needs of working Californians.
Yeah, it used to be that, and it still is to a certain extent, that you had 2 major purchases in your life. You had a car and you had a home.
Yep.
And that's what got you to where you needed to go. Alan, back to you. Ontario Ranch in your city, in 2020 became kind of pulled ahead of the pack, and as it became the 4th most successful master plan community in the nation, and the first in California. So obviously there's a lot of capacity there. What are some of the constraints you're facing, and how you might be looking at those solutions for the rest of your city?
Thank you. And I really appreciate this, David. I want to say this, is that in the old days, the word developer was a dirty word, and we've all been there. And obviously I go out there and I talk about how developers really build communities and build families. I have to say that with the Ontario Ranch Project, and I've been following it for over 20 years, I mean, right? I'm old and I've been here for a long time. And I remember when we first annexed that land, and it's gone through a lot of transition. Where we are right now, though, is we're building a large community. It's 8,200 acres, mixed use. And the problem that we had, obviously, was this was county land, agricultural, and there was no infrastructure at all. No sewer, gutters, water, anything. And when we annexed the property, our commitment to the existing city was, we're going to develop this property without any financial impact to the existing city, which meant someone had to pay for $1 billion worth of infrastructure. And I must say that the developers, they stood up, they took care of it, they built their own consortium. And without that, the community would never have occurred. And of course, for that, I think we do owe the development community of gratitude and thanks, because you guys really stepped up and you did what needed to be done to get the work done. And frankly, to make money. I want to see you make money, because if you're prosperous, certainly the city will be prosperous. The challenge that we were facing, though, with the ranch was creating a tale of two cities. And that's always been a concern of mine, is that you have a city that's over 100 years old, decaying infrastructure, no lighting, no landscaping, because at the time it was put together, there were no assessment districts. The general fund had to pick it up. You go down to the Ontario Ranch, they're paying a lot of money in assessments, but they're also enjoying a much higher quality of life. They have more lighting, more landscaping, quicker responses from police and fire and other kinds of services. My fear was that the folks from the north are going to visit the south and say, what about us? And my answer to them is, you can have the same thing if you vote yourself into an assessment district. It's not a very popular answer, but that really is the answer. So it's maintaining the balance. I truly have a fear that if we find too much separation, at some point, the ranch is going to vote to disincorporate themselves and form their own city. Certainly they're going to be large enough. Certainly they'll have the commercial, the residential components. I need to make sure that they're part of the city and that the existing city is part of the ranch. So it's a real challenge, but it's exciting. And I'll tell you, to go down there and see things working as I envisioned them, it's so gratifying. Dave, I go down there and I visit a project like yours and other folks down there, to see people walking and riding bicycles and families playing in the parks. Nothing like it. As a policymaker, to actually see it implemented according to your vision, it's just great. So once again, I want to thank you. And to bring the development community out, I mean, the state doesn't like it because the events in reality get in the way. But that's, you guys will do it. And I think it goes back to one of the examples that Jennifer brought up. And I do disagree with a lot of her parking. I'm a strong advocate of pricing, but you talk about tandem parking, it's not up to the city to decide, the market will decide. If you build houses with tandem parking and no one buys the houses, you know something's wrong. And so again, I'm very much into an open market and let the market determine. Some of my colleagues don't feel that way. They think if you have a 3-story house, you need to have an elevator. I said, no, people won't buy a house with 3 stories. I mean, it's up to them. So anyway, I think that the city of Ontario is very grateful to the development community, and I think we're very, very proud of Ontario Ranch. And
it might be worth noting here as well that Alan's being pretty modest about some of the things they have done in the old part of, I don't even want to call it the old part of Ontario, but the downtown, which a really fantastic urban park with an amphitheater, some housing that's been built around it, completely restored city hall. So that whole live, work, play thing is slowly getting to downtown Ontario. Is that right, Alan?
Well, and I think you hit on it, Dave. The whole key to success of downtown was housing, is housing. And without the housing, we weren't going to get the retail or anything else. And so we're building housing on every square foot. And I'm sure you've seen the plans. what were vacant parking lots are now becoming high density housing. So that was the key to our success.
Well, let's transition with that high density housing comment back to Cheryl and the city of Menifee. So Menifee, you also have one of the top master plans in the nation, so you've been providing, it seems to be more than your fair share of housing in the region, primarily single family detached. How do you address the affordability issues that are brought about through the RHNA obligation? And are you building, or have you built any of your higher density homes in your city recently?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, that is the case in terms of the housing production. We certainly, in the current RHNA cycle, the fifth RHNA cycle, the city of Menifee has seen, over 5,000 residential units being built. We do benefit from, a lot of previously approved master plan communities and then new master plan communities. So we've got quite a runway of the single family homes ready to build over the next planning cycle. In terms of the higher density residential, our Menifee Town Center project has a new apartment complex. It was built. The city of Menifee right now, our highest density is 24 dwelling units per acre. When we incorporated and did our first general plan, we were kind of mid-cycle, so we were able to move forward with a 24 DU. So we have had new high density residential built as apartment complex, but again, they're not affordable. We're seeing rents, upwards of $1,800 to $2,000. That's a mortgage for some people. So again, just because you zone for a high density doesn't mean it's going to be built as an affordable development.
Dave, I got a quick comment on density, if you don't mind.
Please.
Is what I've learned about density is not what, it's where. And in a city like Ontario, we had someone that wanted to build a duplex in an existing single family neighborhood, and you would have thought we were building 62 an acre. That's how much upper we have in the community. But yet, when we go to the east side of the city, or even the south, where there is no existing residential, we're building 40, 50 to units to an acre without anyone saying anything. So a lot of times, especially a city like ours, it isn't whether or not people want density; it's where they want it.
Relative.
Good point. Yep.
So I think it was 2019. Jennifer, you might know, I was 19 or maybe early 20. It seems like those 2 years kind of ran together for us. But the state sued the city of Huntington Beach for not being in compliance with their housing element. Do we see more of that type of stick coming down from Sacramento? If cities are zoning and providing capacity, but yet maybe not producing or not on track to produce, do you think will be any penalties associated with that?
Well, so I think the Huntington Beach example was a city that just declined to do its housing element. So it's easiest to sue the zero, right? It's much harder to say, well, we don't think this housing element will work prospectively. Or in year 4 of an 8-year cycle, we know this housing element has not worked when we're in, say, an economic recession. So enforcement of housing element law is still tricky. The real teeth in it, so far at least, there's notional fines that happen several years out that seem pretty remote. But the notional more direct consequence is things like Housing Accountability Act or SB 35 type. Therefore, you lose the ability to reject a housing project. I do think that the whole issue of housing approval enforcement is unlikely to be taken up seriously by at least this administration. They're talking about enforcing housing laws more, but their focus is on all affordable housing, not missing middle or market rate housing. And their focus is on trying to find money. It's always happier, I think, if I could be so bold, is for the legislature to claim that they're going to throw some money at stuff rather than actually see if something is going to actually work. So they've stepped up enforcement at HCD. HCD, the Housing and Community Development Department, is run by a pretty energetic guy from DC, and HCD is definitely helping to enforce housing laws. So I don't want to downplay that. But in terms of catastrophic consequences for cities that fail to adopt a compliant housing element under RHNA, that's still pretty speculative.
With there's another question from the audience with the 30 to the acre being sort of the magic number relating to affordable housing. Eric Fowler writes that would it be possible to either get SCAG or the state to reconsider that density to be more in the range of that 14 to 25 to the acre? So would SCAG or the state possibly consider a down zone? I'll start out with maybe asking that to Alan. Alan, you sit on SCAG. Is that something that the SCAG board would entertain?
It's not up to SCAG. I mean, everything is dictated by the state, and that's one of the big problems that we have, is that they don't know what's going on in our region. So it wouldn't be SCAG's call; it'd have to be the state's call.
Yeah,
and I would say absolutely not coming from the state. We have a couple projects burbling through the courts right now, 2 adjacent, I think it's R4 lots, where we have a total of 8 units, 8 condo unit in San Mateo, the city of San Mateo, which is on appeal now. The Attorney General joined us in that appeal to force approval. But it was touch and go because the head of the Office of Planning and Research, Kate Gordon, viewed that as urban sprawl. Anything other than transit dependent high density is disfavored by the state. So if anything, you'd probably, if you went back and asked, you'd probably get 50 DUs an acre, right? Which wouldn't be built at an even greater rate.
Well, we're getting close to time here. Maybe I'll throw it back to Alan. Alan, if you had a magic wand, and and if it was Dave's magic wand, I would say 150 units or less in an infill environment is exempt from CEQA. That would be my magic wand. Any thoughts about yours, Alan? And I'll go around with the panel.
I think to start, the affordability, there definitely shouldn't be any CEQA requirements to build affordable houses. We need to find some kind of incentives to get people to build houses without public subsidy. So I think that would be one thing. And I mean, we could talk about CEQA all day long if we wanted to. Again, in Ontario, we really believe, I think the council finally came around to realize that it's all market driven. When we first looked at the ranch, Dave, it was all half-acre lots, 4 to an acre or whatever it is. And it was our friend Randall Lewis that came in and said, bigger is not better any longer. People want more amenities and smaller lots. And we reacted to it. Some communities may not react to what's really going on, but I really believe that the BIA is the expert in this, and it's all driven by the market, and the BIA knows what the market is much better than we do.
Cheryl, do you have a magic wand?
I love having a magic wand. I think one of the biggest challenges, and we've touched on it, actually I'll say too, really the CEQA challenges, and then the one size fits all legislation that comes from the state that generally is written for more urban cities in Northern California that really don't apply practically here in the Inland Empire. And so we find ourselves always trying to play catch up. The slew of new housing legislation. I think the sentiment is we all want the same thing. We all want to play by the rules, but when the rules are continually changing and have the potential to actually hinder the real production of housing, that's a challenge. And so I think if we can move away from that so that we can all do what needs to be done in a streamlined, simpler fashion, that would be my magic wand.
Excellent. I know Jennifer doesn't have a magic wand. She's got a toolbox with a bunch of tools in it. But I would just like to say that one of the things I got out of Jennifer's comments was that, yeah, let's cheer off the SCAG EIR. Let's create addendums for the housing elements. I think really good, great suggestions for the cities. So Jeff, I believe we're about at time. I'll close this out and just say thank you, Cheryl, Kitzerow, Community Development Director, City of Menifee. Thank you, Alan Wapner, Mayor Pro Tem, City of Ontario, and Jennifer Hernandez. Your comments are always very insightful. This has been a great discussion, and it would even be, I would love to do this in person here, hopefully soon. And this is probably something we're going to talk about a few more times in the course of this year. So Jeff, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Thank you for our panelists, and thank you for the participation. We're going to do this at each chapter, so we will announce the same type of workshop with a blend of builders and elected officials, and LA, Orange County. Looks like we'll have to do Inland Empire again. And then food for thought, the magic wand, we have one. It's called Zoom. It's called telecommuting. It's there. And Jennifer and I talk about it all the time, about the state needs to really recognize that cultural change. And food for thought, one company announced even after the pandemic, their 30,000 employees are still going to telecommute. And that's a little company called Ford, who builds cars. So if that doesn't make food for thought, I don't know what does as we head into the weekend. So
That sounds like we're lowering VMT, just like that.
That's a whole other workshop, Dave. Let's not even go there. Let's not ruin the weekend. But we appreciate it, everybody. Appreciate the panels, and thank you for joining us. Stay tuned for the next Zoom on this topic. Really appreciate it all. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.